Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Brandon, and welcome back to Marotta Media. So we've reached that point, people. We have come to the end of yet another year. And you know what that means? I will be putting out my videos of my best and worst movies of the year. And since I always like to end the year on a positive note, I always start with the worst movies first. And that is what I'm going to be doing in this video today. But before I get into my list, though, there are a few things that I wanted to get out of the way real quick. The first being that this is my list. This is my opinion. There are movies... Holy shit. The beauties of live television, am I right? No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, like I was saying, there are movies on this list that I know a lot of people enjoyed. You may disagree with me, and that's perfectly okay, but these are the movies that came out this year that I personally did not like. There were a lot of phenomenal movies that came out this year, and there were also a lot of really bad ones too. And there are 15 movies that I am going to be talking about in this video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. These movies sucked. These are the 15 worst movies of 2021. And to begin, I guess I started this video off with a lie. There's technically 16 movies that I'm going to be mentioning, but this first one is just an honorable mention because I just had to put it in this video. It's getting a lot of hype and I really don't understand why. So the one and only honorable mention in my worst of 2021 list is Don't Look Up. The American Film Institute had this movie on their best of the year list. It's getting a lot of Oscar buzz, and I really have no idea why, because this movie, for lack of a better word, really sucked. It's so preachy, self-important, and tone-deaf. This is one of those movies that definitely feels that what it's trying to say is the most important thing that's ever been said, but in reality, it's not important at all, and you really couldn't give a shit about what it is saying. Not to mention the multitude of other terrible things about this movie, one of them being the editing. This is probably the worst edited film that I have seen all year. It'll cut to this random stock footage of just a multitude of things. It could be animals, it could be nature, it could be humans doing random things, or it'll cut to still images of the scene that we are currently watching play out. And then there's Don't Look Up's awful script. It feels like this movie was written by someone who saw a brief political disagreement on Twitter and then wrote an entire script around it, and then took the basic understanding of those people's opinions and turned them into characters. I mean, I don't consider myself a cynical person at heart. I try to remain positive about most things, and I know that humanity can be really stupid sometimes, but I don't think they're as stupid as this movie portrays them to be. This movie looks at humanity through such a cynical lens that it makes it harder to take its message that much more seriously. Humanity is dumb and incapable of taking planetary threats seriously. Therefore, we are incapable of change, but we must work together to save the world. Well, which is it? Is humanity just a bunch of idiots, or are we the smartest creatures alive that need to save the world together? The message just got so clouded in its presentation. Adam McKay really needs to stick to comedies, because after this, and he made Vice a few years ago, which I heard was not good. I had no interest in seeing that movie. It's become more clear that he should just stick to what he knows best, and that is comedy. So stop making movies like this. Please. I'm begging you. So I just had to mention that movie before I got into my actual list, so let's get into my actual 15 worst movies of the year. I'll be going over 15 through 11 very quickly and then getting into my more extensive thoughts about the top 10. So starting us off at the bottom at number 15 is Halloween Kills, a tonally inconsistent sequel that was somehow worse than its predecessor. It made the exact same mistake as the 2018 Halloween. It chose to focus on a multitude of characters who you couldn't care less about instead of its most interesting character, Laurie Strode, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. Following that up at number 14 is The Woman in the Window, a cheap Rear Window knockoff that Amy Adams was just too good for. You'd think with a movie that was like Rear Window it would be a lot more entertaining, but this movie was painfully boring and it had such an awful representation of agoraphobia. At number 13 was the critically acclaimed Candyman. I know I'm probably going to get some hate for this one, but I just did not like this movie at all. There is zero subtlety in the message it is trying to convey, and much like Don't Look Up, it thinks what it's saying is very important, but in reality, it's not saying anything important or particularly new. The characters are all empty husks of people. The dialogue at points could be featured in a cringe compilation, and you wouldn't really think anything of it. And on top of that, it just completely butchered the character of Candyman. They didn't make him scary. They just made him some dude. At number 12 is Godzilla vs. Kong. I've been pretty open about my dislike for these movies. I did not like the first two Godzilla movies. In fact, I hated the last one, King of the Monsters, which was on my 2019 worst list. This movie had a very simple formula. All you need to do is make Godzilla and Kong fight as much as possible. And they couldn't even pull that off. Much like King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Kong chooses to focus on these uninteresting human characters and these underdeveloped plot points. But it thinks it solves everything by introducing Mechagodzilla in the end, even though that didn't make it better, it just made it 100 times worse. And it was made even worse by how Mechagodzilla was defeated in the end. They poured whiskey on a keyboard. Does that give you an idea of how awful this movie and its writing was? And just missing my top 10 at number 11 is M. Night Shyamalan's Old. This is probably the worst acted film I've seen all year. The dialogue is so horribly written and the line delivery is even worse. And just like all of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, there is a twist at the end, but this twist just felt so stupid, underdeveloped, and forced. I understand what M. Night was going for here by saying that life is simply too short and we need to live it to the fullest. He could have done it in a more enjoyable, entertaining way, but instead we got this. And it was really bad. Okay, it is now time to get into the top 10, and starting us off at number 10 is the most forgettable movie of the year. Reminiscence. I'm not exaggerating. When I say forgettable, I mean this movie's forgettable. Because I forgot that I even watched it. This movie had such a cool concept, a machine that allows you to relive memories. And it all takes place in a world that's being ravaged by rising temperatures and sea levels. But all of it is completely thrown out the window to focus on this underdeveloped love story where Hugh Jackman puts his life on the line to look for a woman that he just met. Like, honestly, how good does the sex have to be for you to go this far for someone that you barely know? You had so many great ideas here, and you chose to focus on this sappy love story. And following that up at number 9 is F9. Oh, God. This is yet another Fast and Furious movie that contains so much action to the point where it becomes nauseating, disorienting, and tiresome. If you have nonstop action to the point where you don't allow your audience to breathe in between action sequences, then it becomes very tiresome. The action in F9 is so ridiculously far-fetched that it's not even fun to watch. But it thinks that it makes all of that okay with its self-referential humor. Granted, this movie is ridiculously stupid, so if you watch it, you can definitely have a good time with it if you're looking to just make fun of it. My friends and I laughed throughout the entire thing, but that does not mean that it's a good movie. At number 8, we have Tom and Jerry. Have you ever wanted to see a live-action Tom and Jerry movie that Tom and Jerry are barely in and the focus is instead put on a spoiled teenage girl who cheats her way into a job at a hotel and is put in charge of managing a celebrity wedding? Well, then you're in luck. Much like Godzilla vs. Kong, Tom and Jerry is a very simple formula. It's a cat and a mouse chasing each other around and hitting each other with big things. That's it. That is all you need. The original show had such a reach. I watched it as a kid, kids today are watching it, and my parents grew up with that show. And the beauty of it was that it had humor that appealed to both adults and kids. But in this movie, the humor feels like it was written for babies. It's all so juvenile and unfunny, it really makes me wonder who this movie was targeted towards. Keep Tom and Jerry animated and on television. Please don't ever bring them back to the big screen again. And at number 7 is the world's longest Warner Brothers commercial. Space Jam, A New Legacy. All this movie was a 2-hour-long marketing ploy for Warner Brothers to promote their other properties. That's literally all it was. It also doesn't really help when your star couldn't act himself out of a cardboard box. I mean, granted, Michael Jordan didn't do a great job acting in the original Space Jam either, but in that movie you could at least tell that he was trying. LeBron James is out there acting for the check, and that's all his motivation was. Something I forgot to mention in my review of this movie is its soundtrack. The soundtrack for Space Jam: A New Legacy is one of the most forgettable soundtracks I have ever heard. I don't remember a single song or their name on the entire thing. And the original Space Jam had an incredible soundtrack. You had songs like I Believe I Can Fly, Fly Like an Eagle, Basketball Jones, and the self-titled Space Jam song. But that's a precursor just for this entire movie. It's forgettable. Say what you will about the original Space Jam. You may not like it, you may think that it's awful and hasn't aged well, but you gotta admit one thing. It's memorable, and Space Jam: A New Legacy is not memorable. 20 years from now, when kids who grew up with this movie are the same age as those who grew up with the original Space Jam, no one's gonna be talking about it. Not the way they're talking about the original. That's how forgettable this movie was. It didn't need to be made, it was completely unnecessary, and no one is going to remember it. At number 6 is the prime example as to why you should never remake classics, let alone holiday classics. Home Sweet Home Alone. This is why classic movies should never be remade, rebooted, reimagined, re-anything. Like, what was wrong with the original Home Alone? Why did they need to remake it and make it more modern? It takes the exact same premise as the original. A kid gets left by his family at home on Christmas, the family travels to a foreign country, and some burglars try to break in, and he fights back to protect his house. But you know you have a problem when you start to sympathize more with the burglars than the kid. Because the burglars in this movie, played by Rob Delaney and Ellie Kemper, are simply trying to steal back a family heirloom that was stolen from them by this snot-nosed kid, played by Archie Yates. Basically, their dilemma is that they can't afford their house anymore, and they're going to sell it, but they want to stay in it for their children, especially around Christmas. And they discover that this doll they have is worth $200,000 and can save their house. I shouldn't be cheering for the kid to lose in this case. That is a huge problem. In fact, if the movie went this way, then I probably wouldn't have cared.
Just so you guys know, I have a tarantula.
Well, now there are no witnesses.
I know that may be a little harsh, but I mean, do you necessarily disagree with me? Bringing us into the top 5 is the most dumbed down comic book movie that I have ever seen. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Much like Tom and Jerry, this movie was made for babies. This movie is called Let There Be Carnage. Carnage is literally in the name, and yet he is barely in it. Instead, we get to focus on Eddie and Venom's relationship, where they argue like an old married couple because Eddie won't allow Venom to eat people. It's riddled with so many plot conveniences, namely this scene where Carnage just breaks into a gas station and hacks into a computer using only the symbiote out of his fingers. I'm not a tech expert, but I really don't think that's how it works. There's also a ton of scenes that are just rehashed moments from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Hell, even some moments from the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies as well. But easily, this movie's biggest mistake, yet again, is that it's rated PG-13. If you're gonna make a Venom movie, you need to make it rated R. But this movie was a financial success and people loved it, so what the hell do I know? I guess just keep making them because people are gonna go see them. At number 4 is what I believe now is the most watched movie in Netflix history. Red Notice. This is seriously the cheapest looking $200 million movie that I have ever seen. The CGI in this movie is so atrocious and the green screen looks like it was done by a beginning high school student. Don't get me wrong, I love The Rock and Ryan Reynolds, but can anyone tell me a movie they've been in where they actually played a character and not just a variation of themselves? Anyone? But I'd be willing to look past all of these shortcomings if this movie was fun and entertaining. And it was not. In fact, it was really boring. All you need to do is just make it fun, but instead what we got was an incredibly cheap knockoff of Uncharted and Indiana Jones. What were they thinking here? And number 3 is another movie that I honestly forgot that I watched this year, and that was Chaos Walking. But I guess you really can't blame the movie here because it was doomed to fail right from the beginning, with numerous reshoots and Lionsgate even categorizing the first cut of this movie as unreleasable. If the final cut of this movie that they put out was considered okay, then I really want to see what the unreleasable cut looks like. Chaos Walking is based upon a set of young adult novels. Now, I've never read any of them, but I would imagine that the books explain the plot details a lot more than this movie does. Such as, why are men the only people who can have their thoughts be seen? What are the extent of their abilities? If this is the future, why do they ride horses and use primitive guns while others use futuristic guns? What was the point of introducing a native alien race if they were only going to be seen once and had no effect on the outcome? And the characters, they're all so empty, there's nothing special about them, and it all leads to an incredibly predictable twist. And it's such a shame because this movie had such a talented cast. Tom Holland, Daisy Ridley, Mads Mikkelsen, Cynthia Erivo. But honestly, after watching it, I don't think any actor in the world could have saved this movie. And at number 2, we have Hes All That. Do you remember the days when people would audition for movies and get roles because they were talented and they fit the part really well, and not get parts based off the fact that they're famous on TikTok? Yeah, I miss those days a lot. Do you remember last year when TikTok was almost banned for like security reasons or something like that? This movie makes me wish that they went through with that. The 2 main characters of Hes All That are the most unrelatable people in the world. Addison Rae plays Padgett. Yes, that's actually her name. And she's a famous personality on some social media app. And you can tell that the movie makes you want to feel sorry for her and relate to her, but it's really hard to relate to someone whose biggest dilemma in life is losing hundreds of thousands of followers online and sponsorship deals. If anything, you're just glad that this girl got humbled because everything in her life has been handed to her up until this point. And then there's Tanner Buchanan, who plays Cameron. And Cameron is this hipster skater bro who thinks that his thoughts and opinions are above everyone else's. And he also believes that he's the only woke person in a world of sheep. But if you thought those 2 characters were unlikable, then you won't like any character in this movie because they're all pretty detestable human beings. They're all so rude to each other for absolutely no reason. The only likable character is the principal of the school because he's played by Matthew Lillard, and he was too good for this movie. In fact, I think everybody who watched this movie was too good for it because as I was watching it, I could feel my brain cells slowly committing suicide. And we have finally reached the top, the worst movie of 2021. And if you watch my channel, then you know what it's going to be. Cinderella. The story of Cinderella has been done a multitude of ways, but this version is without a doubt the worst. This is a musical, but it doesn't contain any original music. They instead choose to have the characters sing licensed songs for some reason, and the songs that they sing do not fit the mood of the scene that they are featured in at all. It also doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be at times. Does this want to be a movie or does it want to be a music video? Because several of the musical moments are shot as if they were meant to be a music video and they just used ideas they had to interpret into the film. And it tries to push this message of feminism, but its presentation and execution could have been so much more subtle. Cinderella does not know the definition of subtlety. It instead just chooses outright to tell you what it's trying to say because it thinks you're stupid. You can tell that it's trying to push this message of equality, which I'm all for, but instead it presents itself as a movie that believes that women are capable of doing anything that men can do, but it simultaneously bashes men in the process. Because the presentation of all the male characters is just so horrendous. All of them are either overly evil or complete idiots. When this movie came out and was getting absolutely panned by people, this is a comment that I actually found from someone on Facebook. So let's read this together, shall we? Nah, this movie is pure joy. If you didn't enjoy this, then you've forgotten why you enjoyed movies in the first place. Maybe it's time to take a look deep inside yourself and find that inner child that once was able to just laugh and enjoy the better moments of life. It's not that deep, dude. And I mean, hey, if this movie was pure joy and me not liking it means that I've completely forgotten why I've enjoyed movies and just life itself, then so be it. Well, that's it, everybody. That was my list of the worst movies of 2021. If you guys agree with me or you disagree with me, then please let me know. Comment down below. I would love to see what you thought came out this year that was just absolutely horrendous. If you guys like this video, then be sure to hit that thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. If you want to see my previous worst of the year list from 2020 and 2019, then I'll link those right over here. Other than that, I hope you all have a tremendous rest of your day, and I will see you all next time when we go over the best movies of the year.